It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Tuesday, October 8th, 2024, and you know what that means. It's time to get nerdy, y'all. Welcome to episode number 320 of Two Nerds in a Pod, the nerdiest video game podcast in the galaxy. I am Lam, also known as Mr. Nice Guy, and I'm joined by my comrade in gaming commentary, the hoodie-wearing, t-shirt tearing, law ensnaring, video game connoisseur, Maction. Mac, how are you, buddy?
I am amazing, and that was a fantastic... I will take all the superlatives. Thank you, sir.
100%.
It's been a couple of weeks, though, dude. How are you? Have you been up to anything interesting?
I've been good. You know, the only thing I've been up to is, hashtag suburban dad life. Lots of soccer games this weekend. 3 kids that play soccer. So I was at a tournament all weekend, going back and forth, having a good time, watching my kids win some, watching them lose some, but watching them battle hard. I was very proud of how they played. And then I was in New Orleans last week for work. And Mac, you ever go somewhere and you think, you know what, if I was just to drive an hour out of my way, I could go have a blast. But then you realize, you know what, I'm too old for that. I'll tell you what happened to me. So I was in some meetings in a part of Louisiana, and I Googled, and I saw, oh, there's a tactical laser tag place about an hour out of my way. I could totally go there, get in like a 7 to 9 session. It doubles as exercise. It fills the time, and then I could just go back to my hotel. But it's an hour the opposite direction. And you know what, Mac? The sensible part of me said, you know what? I am not going to do that. I am going to go back to my hotel, and I'm going to grab some dinner, and I'm going to go to sleep. And that's what I did. So not as cool as I used to be, unfortunately.
As somebody who lives an hour from anywhere and 15 minutes from nowhere, I very much empathize with the idea that's like, man, yeah, I could drive an hour out of my way to go do something cool, but no, thank you.
Yeah, sleep is very, very valuable. And you know what? I think I did that evening? I had my Steam Deck. I don't think I even played my Steam Deck. I think I literally went and got some Raising Cane's, which are chicken fingers that are based in Louisiana. I watched some Shark Tank.
Yes.
And I called my wife.
Nice.
And I think I got a little bit of Steam Deck time in. But other than that, it was pretty chill.
Sounds like a fantastic evening.
Mac, enough about me. What have you been up to?
Dude, the past couple of months have been crazy because in the past 3 years that I've lived out here in this beautiful location on the Oregon coast, I've had very precious few people come to visit. In the last couple of months, I think I've had more people come to visit than in the past 3 years combined. And so it's just been weekends of people over.
Love it.
I'm almost not used to having in-person stuff anymore. So it's been fun and addictive and great. And then of course you have the big high and then the big sad after everybody leaves, and then just for somebody else to come along, and it's great. And this last weekend was in the style of finishing off a D&D, Dungeons & Dragons campaign together in the same spot. We'd been playing it online via Discord for the past 3 years, video conferencing and playing, and now we get to the finale, and it was just a great time. So that was one thing, but there was another very, very cool thing that happened last Monday.
What?
As a matter of fact.
What?
Well, Mr. Nice Guy, we won a podcast award.
Oh, yes, we did. Tell me more, Mac. I know about it, but for those who don't, tell me more.
For those of you who don't, we won a podcast award, the Games and Hobbies Award. We were against some fantastic, amazing competition, and the panels that decided that we were worthy of the trophy for the 4th year in the row, and that is fantastic. We also clinched another one entirely because of my efforts. Best Black hosted, as you know.
Yeah.
Just an honor and a privilege to be nominated is what I'll say about that in all seriousness.
I'll tell you this. The podcast awards, it's a great promotional thing. It's a great community thing. We've connected with so many awesome people as a result of doing it for several years. I got to say, if you win a category for 5 years in a row, they rename that category after you. So next year is going to be year 5 in a row for games and hobbies if we win. When we win, I'm confident that we will. But here's the thing that I think would be hilarious. I am black. You are Caucasian. If we win, if we were to keep entering Best Black Hosted Podcast and win it, I almost wonder if they would have our logo up there. Which for those who don't know, the logo is a picture of me and also a picture of Mac, who is not a person of color. So I think that would be awesome if we were to win that one as well for the next few years.
Hey, I'll go out for it as many times as you are willing to co-sign on that loan, man, because I can't cash those checks.
That's all right. Well, Mac, speaking of checks we can cash checks with our video game knowledge, and I say we do that. We hop right up in that gaming news, my friend. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Mr. Nice Guy, I am so out of the loop. What is new in video gaming?
So much. And once again, this is episode 320 of Two Nerds in a Pod, nerdiest video game podcast in the galaxy. Thank you for those of you who are here live and those who are here after the fact listening with your ears. Well, Mac, today let's talk about some gaming deals to start. And we're just going to talk about one that I found extremely interesting. This is the Nitro Deck Plus, and I'm reading about this on GameSpot.com in an article by John Bittner. He writes, there are plenty of controller grips to choose from while playing Switch in handheld mode, but few are as popular as the Nitro Deck Plus. The handheld controller is an upgraded version of the original Nitro Deck, and while it's quite expensive normally at $70, you can pick it up for $55 during Prime Big Deal Days. That's an interesting name for it. That's the lowest price ever for the handheld controller, so you consider making an upgrade while you can. He goes on to say the biggest difference between this and the original Nitro Deck is the new symmetrical analog stick layout, which should make it more comfortable to use. It also benefits from new sidekick buttons. And Mac, this has Hall effect joysticks. It's kind of similar to the Steam Deck in that it has back paddles. I want to talk to you generally and to the chat about controllers. We've gone from the fact where we had an A and a B and a D-pad and a start and a select, and now we have back paddles, we have programmable controllers. As a Steam Deck owner, as a PC connoisseur who probably has some hip controllers, do you ever use those extra features? The back paddles, the programmable buttons, the customizable vibration. Is that your thing, or is it overkill?
My sphere of gaming tends to lean more into the older school, the older style. It is the case that most of those games don't really take that much advantage of the bells and whistles that we can do with programmable controllers.
You've been playing Baldur's Gate, though. Baldur's Gate 3.
Oh, yeah.
And so games like that give you that opportunity where there's a lot of controls. So I thought maybe something you've embraced, maybe not.
I really haven't done that much. Even in something like Baldur's Gate 3, they make the just run-of-the-mill controls relatively robust enough with the tools that they know everybody has. So I feel like I get everything that I need in just the normal stuff. And so I don't really feel like I need the bells and whistles, and I don't really use them that much.
You know what's interesting about all the customization, and this is so funny to me. Now, granted, making something, taking advantage of turbo customization, like making it so you can shoot faster and things like that, is one thing, especially when you consider multiplayer. Once upon a time, having a customizable controller was cheating, especially if you were gaming online, right?
Oh, yeah.
Or if you're trying to speed run and set a record. So that's a thing. But I like the idea that you can customize things that are just frustrating to do. Rather than having to try to twist your hand and do certain commands, you can just make a button that does it for you. So I like that, not just from an accessibility standpoint, but from a single player standpoint. Play the game how you want to play it. Don't feel like you need to enter in all these different button combinations just to impress the gaming gods. Just use those back paddles and make things more convenient. And what's more, Mac, more gaming companies are encouraging us to do this. Things like the DualSense Edge have programmable controllers. They have they make it so you can actually edit how far you have to push the trigger to shoot in a first-person shooter. So I like this a lot. And I actually may pick one of these up as, Joy-Cons are $80. This is $55.
So, a question for you, Mr. Nice Guy. Let's say that we were playing like a fighting game, and I just can't nail the Shoryuken or what have you from Ken or Ryu or whichever one does it. Honorable or not honorable for me to plug that in as a macro on one of my back buttons?
I think it's dishonorable, and the reason why is because when you're talking about playing against other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's dishonorable, and the reason why is because I think a big part of fighting games like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, whatever it is that thinking in the moment, that improvisation of, my opponent just did this, I'm going to counter with this. And there's a certain amount of time, even if it is just tenths of a second, that it takes to enter in those commands, to do those combos. Being able to simply press a button gives you such an advantage that I think it's just not fair.
So get good is the stance of Two Nerds in a Pod, a video game podcast.
Kid. Get good, kid. We have in the chat, Busta Right On says he has not used his back paddles on his Steam Deck. Not sure if he would. I'm curious what type of games you're playing, Busta. If you could give me 2 or 3 examples in the chat, just curious. Because if you're like Mac, maybe they're just not as relevant, or maybe you're playing more modern stuff. I don't know.
Could be.
Regardless, this is one of the better Amazon deals. This thing looks really fresh, works with your Steam Deck, with your Switch and your Switch OLED. If you are in need of controller, pick it up. I think it's probably worth it.
What was it called again?
It's called the Nitro Deck Plus. And this one, like I said, also comes with Hall Effect joysticks, so you're not going to have to worry about stick drift. It makes your Switch turn more into a Steam Deck in terms of size. And it does have the back paddles, does have the kickstand. Also comes with an option to connect to your TV. Well, hey, just wanted to share that deal with y'all. Let's keep things moving with some other stuff that's going on in the gaming industry. This is on IGN.com, written by Wesley Yin Poole. And Mac, this one's interesting to me. We're going to have some great conversation here. Wesley writes, Sony has announced plans to pull Little Big Planet 3 from the PlayStation Store for good after years of insurmountable server issues caused by hackers. The PS4 version of Little Big Planet leaves the PlayStation Store permanently on October 31st, with all its DLC going with it, Sony said. It's worth noting that if you already own Little Big Planet or buy it before October 31st, you can continue to play after this point. Similarly, if you have downloaded Little Big Planet 3 via PlayStation Plus, you will still be able to play. Quote, after 10 years of playing, creating, and sharing content in Little Big Planet 3, the game and our entire range of Little Big Planet DLC will be removed from the store on October 31st, read a statement. This is a friendly heads up that if anyone in the community or any newcomers still want to own a digital copy of Little Big Planet 3 or any Little Big Planet DLC currently available for purchase, this is your last chance to do so. So, Mac, this is actually probably what I should have chosen as our topic of the week, but let's talk about it now because there's a lot of things at play here. Number one is the idea of hackers being able to ruin a game so much that the company just says, you know what, we're just going to take it down. So that's the first thing here. Number two is the idea of a company, is it more ethical for them to take it down and say, hey, we don't want people to put their money into this anymore because we can't control what's going on? Or should they have more of an obligation to say, we need to put a stop to this as opposed to just allowing it? Let's start there. What do you think? Are they noble for taking it down and preventing people from purchasing something that's been hacked? Or should they put more effort into stopping this nonsense?
So I have not played the Little Big Planet games, but as I understand it, are they primarily a multiplayer experience or primarily a single player experience?
It's a combination of both. So it's effectively a platforming game, single player, but it has a co-op option. And this is one of the first games that I ever bought for my kids.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that they really enjoy. In fact, I have a picture of them holding the game, Little Big Planet 3. So it's kind of cute from back in the day. But it can be single player, it can be co-op, but the gist of it is platforming, collecting little trinkets. It's not like super hardcore. There's little bosses that require some coordination with you and your partner. But the thing that probably has been hacked is that you can create your own levels. So I don't know what people have done to hack to ruin it, but it's happening.
Well, with that as the backdrop, I think there is little to no limit to the, shall we say, the ability of humans to kind of work their way around a constraint, of hackers to identify a weak point in the system. Every time there is this DRM or this whatever will never be broken, it gets broken in days, in weeks.
Right.
Now, sometimes it may be the type of thing that people don't wind up doing on their own, or it doesn't become widespread because of how complicated it is.
Sure.
But rarely, if ever, is there a system that doesn't get breached, doesn't get hacked. I don't know how the hackers are making it bad, but I recognize that because of the way people are, it is probably always going to be a game of whack-a-mole, essentially, trying to bat away this particular approach method and that approach method, because some people are in it for the kicks of ruining it, and they're gonna do their best to work around, and 10 years is a long time to be trying to do that. Now, is it I wonder, was it the company that said that it was because of the hacking, or is that somebody's
speculation,
editorial about it? Yeah,
that's a great question. And here's the thing. Just to read it again, it says Sony has announced plans to pull Little Big Planet 3 from the PlayStation Store for good after years of insurmountable server issues caused by hackers. So it's simply saying that that's happening. It's not saying that is the reason.
Okay.
And so it's hard to say, because in their quote, Sony did not acknowledge that is the reason why, at least in the quote that I read here.
Yeah.
Here's my thing. A lot of times when I'm going to buy an older game, and we'll call it a game that's 5 years or older, I will research that game before I buy it. I see it on a Steam sale. I'll go to Reddit, see what the community looks like. Is it solid? Am I going to be able to play this without issue? And a lot of times people will say, hey, if you're thinking about hopping into this game, beware that there are hackers. Now, at that point, it's then on me as the consumer to say, am I willing to purchase this and deal with that? Or do I not want to deal with that? And so I disagree with them taking it down, not just from a game preservation standpoint, but from a standpoint that I, as a gamer, can make the decision to purchase a game with hackers if I'm willing to play around that or deal with it. And so I think that they should have left it up.
Informed decision making is what you think's carrying the day here?
I agree. That's exactly it. And here's the other thing. I don't know that Sony really does have an obligation to try to continue stopping hackers. Yes, they may still be profiting from it, but you have to consider that the time and resources of hackers who are dedicated to ruining Little Big Planet 3, the time aspect is bigger than what Sony has to focus on every single 10-year-old game that they have ever created.
I'm not going to lie, just the phrase, the hackers dedicated to ruining Little Big Planet 3 is kind of a hilarious
It is. I was playing Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War a couple weeks ago, and someone had just hacked the game. They were shooting us across the map, doing 360s from across the map, and someone said, why are you doing this on a 4-year-old game? And the hacker on the mic said, because it's fun. And, Activision has made so many Call of Duty games. The idea of them being able to stop hackers in every single game is impossible, and the same logic applies here. It's wrong and it's frustrating, but I get it. You want to make new stuff, you got to spend your time where it makes sense. So leave the game up, Sony. I wish you would, and maybe ban the hackers. I don't know. Find something to do, but don't feel like you need to put so much time into stopping that you can no longer have the game up.
Yeah, no, I'm sad for those people who won't be able to get on board Little Big Planet 3. It's wild to think that every year we have new gamers coming in, people who've never been into this scene. And for you and me, we can throw in our air quotes, perfectly legitimate copy of Little Samson and introduce them. But it is difficult when games get delisted to be like, this might be gone for good.
Right.
How do we get somebody on board if they didn't already have it?
In the chat, we have someone saying that they have a copy of Little Big Planet that was given away for free with PS Plus. That copy you will still be able to play. I did read that in the article. Mac, one last news story real quick. And the question I'm going to ask you about this is, can we move from creating new hardware to simply creating new engines as a way of moving games forward? And here's the article by Cameron Koch. on GameSpot. Cameron writes, "It's a new era for Halo as developer 343 Industries announced at the conclusion of the 2024 Halo World Championships that not only are multiple new Halo projects in the works, but they will be developed as long rumored with Unreal Engine 5 instead of Halo Infinite's Slipstream engine. 343 Industries itself is also undergoing a major change, rebranding as Halo Studios." Mac, I'm not going to read this whole article, but I did watch some videos of this new Unreal Engine 5, and it looks beautiful. It's definitely a step forward for Halo. As long as hardware can still support new engines, do you think that the idea of companies embracing these new engines rather than continuing to use old engines like Slipstream could prolong the hardware life cycle? Does that question make sense?
I think it does. And I think it does. New engines do have the capability, the possibility of doing things easier, things that you had to cobble together in a previous engine. One of my favorite games, Chasm, I do know that James over there at BitKid Games, he certainly had to cobble together a whole lot of things in order to make the game, because he was doing it in an engine that he felt comfortable with, that worked, that he knew he could do things, but he really had to, use baling wire and duct tape to add on new things that would work the game the way that he wanted to. And then that leads to cleanup later, and of course eventually, as he's working on his new game, it's a new engine that he's working in, but it's proven itself to be significantly easier to work in that engine to do the things that he wants to do. Every engine is going to be, kind of a little bit different, because, we do not yet have the one engine to rule them all. But, in theory, yeah, I think new engines could probably prolong hardware life cycles. But I think, as with anything, there's going to be sort of a tapping out point. We're going to get diminishing returns and going to need something new or special to improve on. But, what the future holds with respect to hardware and software, anybody's guess.
So here's my thoughts, and then we'll wrap on this for news for the week. I believe that there has to be a way for us to get incremental upgrades with our gaming consoles, much like you get with a PC.
Without having to throw out the whole console and bring in a whole new one?
Exactly. And this is the first generation where I have experienced the ability to take apart my PlayStation 5 or take apart my PlayStation, put in additional hard drive space, put it back together, and with some simple software updates, and getting the hard drive working the way you would in a PC, have it work. And I can't help but think that there'd be a similar way to do that with the graphics card, that they could put out some mid-season controller upgrades that would be better than the original DualSense that I got at launch, that would give me new capabilities that would make it feel like a fresh console.
Yeah.
We do it with PCs. We're now able to take our consoles apart. I think that coupled with new engines could potentially give us a 10, a 15-year gaming life cycle, saving money for the gaming companies, and also allowing developers to continue developing for longer on the consoles without needing new dev kits. Mac, anything else you want to add?
It would be a wonderful world if we could do a little less ditching of the old consoles and, giving this stuff fresh life. So I'm all on board. Somebody, you got to get on this and figure it out, because I don't want to ditch what I've got.
Let's void those warranties. That's been our news for the week.
All right. Well, now that we've taken a look at what's going on around us right now, let's take a little look into the past. Mr. Nice Guy, I'm going to start with most recently and head backward. This last week, we've had a lot of interesting things go on, and I want to focus on some of the stuff that happened right out of the gate near the beginning of October. One happened back in the year 2000, and this is more personal in aspect, and that would be the release of RPG Maker for the PlayStation 1. So, came out in 2000. To give you an idea of where I was at the time, I hadn't yet, I think this would have been just before, or just the start of my freshman year, rather. I was hanging out with a good friend of mine from across the street, And we had played Pokemon together as those were released. Video games were a big part of our friendship. There's a theme here in Maction's life, his friendships, video games, always connected.
Always.
We had always thought that it would be fun if we could make a video game ourselves. And while we didn't have access to high-end computers, the RPG Maker for PS1 kind of gave this kind of promise that we'd be able to make an RPG. We'd be able to make a game together. And we heard that it was coming out because he was subscribed to all the video game magazines. And so we went ahead and we got our hands on all the graph paper that we could possibly do, plotting these maps, planning the ideas, the plans, and everything. Sadly, for the PlayStation 1, the RPG Maker, which would have given you the ability to make an RPG in kind of nearly Super Nintendo graphics style. Think Final Fantasy III for us in the North America.
Okay.
But sadly, the PS1 release of RPG Maker had such a limited release, we never really got our hands on it. So we just kept on with our designing the game on paper because we knew, okay, we're going to get our hands on one of these games sometimes. It's going to pop up there in the store, and we're going to get our hands on it. I think, Mr. Nesguy, the most important thing
What's that?
to happen, if we go back, early October 1979, Atari had just been sold to Warner Communications, and four developers at Atari had just kind of had enough of that nonsense, and they left Atari to start their own studio, a studio we've probably heard of before called Activision.
Of course.
So since these folks came straight from Atari, they knew exactly how to make games for the hot Atari console of the time, which would have been the Atari 2600. So they made video games and they made cartridges for it. Something that's a little different in these days is that you didn't make your own cartridges. Nobody had really done it before. When the home console scene started, right, most games were pre-programmed onto the console yourself, and that was it. And then Jerry Lawson invented video game cartridges. And so that's how it was possible for us to essentially upgrade a video game console to play more than just those initial things. And then the console became a multi-use device with extra games. But even then, the only people who had the expertise to make the games, make the cartridges, were the platform owners themselves. So all of that was first-party development. Or maybe they contracted somebody specifically, making them a second-party developer to work with them. But in the end, it was still the console owners pushing the games that they made or that they had contracted. But Activision was the first third-party developer. They weren't owned by a console company. They weren't contracted by a console company. And for a whole host of reasons, this was frustrating to Atari. That led to lawsuits, some of which we've talked about in the past. But yeah, it all started in early October 1979. We get our first third-party developers for a video game console. And well, that's what I had for video game history this afternoon.
I love it. I love it. I love it, man. Well done, as always. Mac, it's time for a segment that I love, a segment called Topic of the Week,
Woo-woo!
where we talk about something relevant in gaming and give our opinions on it. Now, Mac, we don't want to be redundant, and we've discussed this topic before, the importance of game preservation. Now, we often talk about it from the standpoint of if games get taken down from storefronts, or if there are not enough copies of a game, we can't continue to play it. And if ROM sites get taken down, that means that the game files are lost forever. But what we don't often talk about, or what we don't talk about as much, is what happens if the hardware is all gone. Because yes, Nintendos are a limited quantity, but we also get people making new versions of the original NES. Analog is a company that often does that. They make new hardware that can play older software. But I also think, Mac, an important part of accessibility with gaming is being able to have emulators. And so we're going to talk about that today. This is on Kotaku.com, written by Ethan Gach. Here's what Ethan wrote on October 1st. This is a couple weeks old. Another Nintendo Switch emulator has been taken offline as Nintendo's crackdown on the homebrew scene continues. Work on the open source emulator Ryujinx will cease, and downloads for it have been removed after its creator was approached by the Mario Maker approximately 7 months after Switch emulator Yuzu also bit the dust. Quote, yesterday, Ryujinx creator GD Chan was contacted by Nintendo and offered an agreement to stop working on the project, remove the organization, and all related assets he's in control of, reads a message shared by one of its collaborators under the handle RIP in Perry Perry on Discord. Quote, while awaiting confirmation on whether he would take his agreement, the organization has been removed, so I think it's safe to say what the outcome is. Now, Mac, bottom line is that you can no longer download Ryujinx. Mm-hmm. This is the second Switch emulator that has been removed. Mm-hmm. We have no idea, as far as what I can find online, about what Nintendo offered this person, whether it was actually an offer or whether it was more of a threat. We don't know. But we do know this. We know that the team behind Ryujinx was also working on an iOS port to potentially allow games like Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Mario Kart 8 to run on the newest iPhones, as well as on other things, the Odin Pro and other handhelds. Mac, number one, let's just guess. What do you think Nintendo offered for him to take down this project?
Nintendo offered in the style of a mob boss. Would be a shame if we did something financially, legally speaking. That's that I think is the most likely.
You're probably right.
After all, we are talking about people who have deep connections to plumbers in Brooklyn, so, you know.
You never know, dude. Is that a picture of your family on the desk? Beautiful family. Beautiful family. It'd be a shame if something was to happen.
Such a shame.
I can't believe that Nintendo offered to pay them to stop. Like, the closest thing that could have happened to that would have been Nintendo saying, stop, and we'll give you a job. You know what I mean? Like, come work for us and show us how you did this.
That's a very Sega move, though. It doesn't seem much like a Nintendo move, but yeah, definitely within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I think that they probably just said, hey, look what has happened with other emulators, which I'm sure they were already aware what's happened. And they said, you know, you can take this down now and we'll let it go. Or if you continue to pursue this, this is what's going to happen. And I don't know, maybe they did say, we'll give you $100,000, like, I don't know, $100,000. You've been working on this for X number of years. We get it. You know, we'll pay you pennies to us to stop.
Yeah.
So, number 2 question for you, Mac. What do you think this does in terms of the precedent that it sets for game preservation? Now, I've said that my opinion is that game preservation is more than simply the ROMs. It's having the ability to play them without having to purchase hardware that often goes faulty or can be hard to find, or is, you know, people are priced out of. I don't want to lead you down a route, but am I right? Am I wrong? Like, what do you think happens going forward with these emulators?
No, I think you're right. One of the things, at the very least in the United States, right, is that people get hardware patents, software patents. These things expire. They have a certain period of time. You can renew them. But they do expire. You can't extend them into perpetuity because the notion of the patent is meant to protect your method, your kind of, not quite trade secret, that's a different thing, but, you know, your specific method you've developed for a period of time so that you can be the one who is the user of that method. But it's never meant, and thank goodness people haven't gotten to it like they got to copyright, but it's never meant to be forever. And one of the reasons why we can have Analog Pocket, why we can have the Nintendo AVS that I proudly have on my shelf to play Nintendo games, is because those hardware patents have expired, and so now you are welcome to make a original Nintendo using the same type of schematics, but using upgraded chips, or using even field programmable gate array in order to make the console. And that's what a lot of things like Analog Pocket and such is doing. So I feel like because of that, there will be eventually new hardware that comes out to replace old hardware. So I feel like so long as we don't have the always online requirements that gets protected under the copyright and is for 90 years, and 90 years plus protections, then those circumstances wind up being the case where we can have maybe as all the Nintendo Switches are failing. But then at the same time, I feel like, Nice Guy, is it just me, or does it feel like a Switch fails so much faster than a Nintendo 64?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that the Switch just has so many other components.
That's it.
That can go wrong. And I think that the controller, now granted, the N64 controller was no GameCube controller.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
The joysticks on those things, if you find one where the joystick is tight, buy it and pick it up, because some of them just went bad after a while. But I'd agree with you. The Switch, in many ways, fails faster than an NES or a SNES or N64.
Oh, yeah. And I think that'll continue to be the place. The more components we have, the more driven a console is for speed, the faster that heat will build up, the faster those components will fail, and the more quickly we'll be in need for replacements that we won't get. And whereas there are a lot of original Nintendos that are still working to this day, but now we have plenty of reproductions that are doing just fine, I don't think the current frame is going to allow us to get those. We will eventually get those replacement Switches, but it'll be long after the last one has sunsetted, I feel like. So, yeah, emulation all the way.
Yeah, I had forgotten about this till you just said this. There was this guy at the Midwest Gaming Classic who makes his own hardware. And so he had all these unique things he had made on the desk. Like, he had a NES that was handheld, where you could put the NES cartridge in it and, like, walk around playing Ninja Turtles. And they were ugly, but it shows that it can be done. Now, there's a difference between doing those types of projects for fun or on a one-off for someone who pays you a commission versus mass producing them so that many, many people can continue to enjoy these games. And I'm not talking about enjoying them on the Nintendo Switch eStore or on Nintendo Switch Online. I'm talking about enjoying the original hardware in a somewhat similar manner into the way that it was intended. I'm a fan of emulation. I don't like the route that we're going. And I hope that Nintendo doesn't start to go after more classic emulators like the NES, the SNES. I hope that it just kind of stops with the Switch, and we'll see what happens.
Same.
That has been our topic of the week.
All right. Well, now we turn to a crowdfunding project that's trying to get off the ground. We call this Kick or Kickstart. You know what this is about. I've posted a link in the chat to a crowdfunding project. We'll discuss the virtues, the vices, and then we'll say whether or not it should be kick or kickstarted. And Mr. Nice Guy, you've probably already seen the big red flag, or in this case, yeah, pretty much red flag right up at the top. But before we get there, let me introduce you to Exile. At least I think it's supposed to be said Exile. Maybe it's supposed to be said Exile. I could see that as well. It is a Metroidvania-style game, hand-drawn. The notion of it is to have and evoke these sorts of impressions, somewhat similar to Hollow Knight or other delightful Metroidvanias. And the funding goal was very, very low. $1 to fund this bad boy, and sitting at $13,000 at the moment. We'll come back to that. There's reasons. But if you wanted to get yourself a copy of this game, the offer was $18 for a digital copy to be delivered in February of 2026. So still a lot of work to go through. But if you, say, fancied some access earlier, the $28 tier would get you what was called demo access that would get delivered in early 2025. Presumably, it's been in development for the last 6 years. Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it. But now we can sort of talk about the elephant in the room. Mr. Nice Guy, you care to read that red flag?
I do, and I had actually seen this on Reddit the other day because I'm subscribed to the Metroidvania Reddit. The red flag says funding suspended. Funding for this project was suspended by Kickstarter 6 days ago.
Mr. Nice Guy, I'm curious to see if you've got any additional intel from what you saw on the Reddit community.
Well, and Mac, you may have seen this, but the pledge goal is $1. So a lot of the thought, a lot of the analysis was that they were trying to get around Kickstarter's all or nothing policy by creating an extremely low funding goal to guarantee they'd get their money.
Now, this certainly could be the case. This was also up, I think maybe about a year ago or so. This is the second bite at the apple, if you will. The first one was only 24% funded, and that, same people, but that was back in June of 2023. So it's essentially been a full year. It made about $11,000 of its $50,000 goal. Now this time, of course, like you said, it's made $13,000 of its $1 goal. But I don't know, Mr. Nice Guy, because number one, it doesn't look as though there's been appreciably that much more that has happened between the 2023 Kickstarter and now. Everything seems to be relatively the same from what we see of the, of the Vidya itself. I mean, obviously, I want to support some people from Illinois.
Let me ask you this, Mac. In the 2023 Kickstarter, what was the estimated release date? Do we have access to that information?
The estimated delivery in 2023 was February of 2025, so Q1 of 2025. It's entirely possible that kind of delivery date is dependent on being able to quit your day job and go to work full time on a game, which would be especially important because this game is a single person.
Oh, it's a solo dev?
It is.
Okay.
And so that, I think, kind of makes perfect sense in the greater context.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you could see where I was going with the release date, which is if it was going to release, 2 years after your last Kickstarter, it should probably be closer to being ready to go. Unless you just took a break for the whole year between the two Kickstarters, I don't understand why we're waiting for 2026 for this. I'll say this. Just from an aesthetics perspective and from the influences on this game, it looks awesome. I love Metroidvanias, and this looks really good. He has listed Cuphead, Attack on Titan, Hollow Knight, and Nier Automata, which I'm not a fan of Nier. I haven't played it, but the other three are all things that I really, really enjoy. And I can see the Attack on Titan influence in the way that this looks. So I want this to succeed. Like, I think this looks fantastic. I don't think that the price point is crazy. I hate to say the same thing on Kickstarters when people keep making the same mistakes, but if quitting your day job is the goal, then the amount of money that you're asking for should really be enough to survive on. And if he's 18, maybe he lives at home, who knows? But I just feel like there's some bad planning here.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I like the look, I like the style. I would expect, especially if it's been in development for the past 6 years, that you should have a demo that is available at the Kickstarter phase, not that's available in 4 months, 5 months out. But, that's just me. If this had not had its funding suspended, I would probably say kick because I want to see a demo. But, I guess Kickstarter has maybe made that for us. Now, I will say that this story is not ended yet, as in the comments, the creator has said that he's going to press forward. He's asking Kickstarter to lift the suspension and to let the project proceed. So I wish him all the best of luck, but don't think it's quite for me in the state that it's in.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally impossible for me to say that I want to kickstart this when it's suspended. But
what if it wasn't?
Yeah, and that's the thing. If it wasn't suspended, once again, it's hard to look at something where the guy asked $1 and not be skeptical. So, I mean, if it was not suspended, I would actually probably vote to kickstart this, especially knowing that it's a solo dev, because this could be an example of someone who is just planning on living extremely, extremely frugally for the next 2 years while he does this and just wants to focus on the game and eat ramen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I would have kickstarted this, and I guess I will say kickstart. I hope that he gets brought back up and that he has the opportunity to finish this and to do it ethically.
I would certainly love to see this project completed. We wish you all the best. And that's been Kicker Kickstart.
Awesome. Well, now it is time for Nerdflex.
Woohoo!
A segment where you, the viewers, try to stump the hosts. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. If you're here live, you have a job to do. Put a multiple-choice gaming-related question in the chat. Mac and I will use nothing but our noggins to try to answer. No phone a friend, no Google, no cheating of any kind. We will just answer the questions. And if we don't have any questions in the chat, we also have a test bank where we come up with some questions. So, Mac, I've chosen our first randomly chosen question from the test bank, and this is an awesome question. It's going to require me to think a little bit. It's a special round.
Ooh.
Name 2 female video game villains.
Ooh. Well, I'm going to go for an easy one. Maleficent shows up in the Kingdom Hearts series.
That's a good one. I like that. This is, I don't know if this counts, but like in Mario 2, the pink dinosaur who shoots eggs at you, the boss.
Oh,
that's a video game villain, right?
Yeah.
It's probably a Japanese name.
I can't remember. I could have told you, but the name's just not coming to me.
Can I go with Evil Madeline? Would that count from Celeste?
Battlein?
The evil version. Is her name Badeline?
Yeah, her name's Battlein, 100%.
Okay, so Badeline is one. I'm trying to think of others.
Although, is she a villain or is she an anti-hero? She's
That's
certainly
true.
a villain for at least part of it.
Yeah, she's trying to kill you.
Oh, Mother Brain?
Yeah, for sure. It's so hard because we don't even have enough female protagonists, let alone
antagonists.
villains.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of stories. I don't know. I think we've named 2. And I'm interested to see when we flip it over what the other ones are.
Sniper Wolf from Metal Gear Solid, I think, counts.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I'm tapping out. I think even if we lose a couple of those, we've definitely met at least the minimum of 2.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so here. Oh wow, there's some we should have gotten here. The main one we should have gotten is GLaDOS.
Oh, GLaDOS, of course.
Technically, GLaDOS is a computer, so
but as we know from Portal 2, spoiler alert, Carolyn was a human.
Yeah, that's true. So GLaDOS, Lady Demi Retshu, I don't know who that is. Shodan.
Never heard of her.
Mother Brain is on here.
Oh, Shodan from System Shock 2. Another evil AI.
I have not played those. Ultimecia and the boss.
Oh, Ultimecia from Final Fantasy VIII. Gosh, there are some good ones.
I knew there'd be some anime-related thing.
Ah, gosh, we learn new things every time.
Okay, JRPG question. What is the name of the GameCube Paper Mario title?
Is it 1,000 Year Door?
I believe it is 1,000
Okay, because I feel pretty good about that answer.
1,000 Year Door, final answer. Let's see what it says. Yes, the 1,000 Year Door. We'll count it.
Okay, 2 for 2. Woo-woo.
Okay, and believe it or not, Mac, we just got another special round. Name 3, and this is pretty easy in my mind. Name 3 games where you create a custom avatar.
Morrowind, any of the, the whole Elder Scrolls series, most of the whole Fallout series.
Yeah. Baldur's Gate 3, right?
For sure.
I mean, I feel like Diablo 4, you also create a custom avatar to a certain extent.
Okay, haven't played 4, so.
But I mean, basically any RPG, you're creating a custom avatar. Cyberpunk 2077, you create you alter your character.
I feel good about that. We've got at least several.
Let's see what we got on the back. Okay, so it's funny. We got all of them, dude.
Hey!
It gives Baldur's Gate 3, Cyberpunk 2077, and Morrowind, which is an Elder Scroll game.
Nice. Yeah, well done, us. 3 for 3. Woo-woo.
Let's go. That's been Nerdflex.
All right. Well, now we turn to a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
I'm not a lawyer. We just like talking about legal stuff because it worms its way into the things that we love most, which is video games. Now, one thing I'm going to give you updates on periodically here is that we still don't know what patents Nintendo is using to sue Palworld. And I could go on and re-highlight something that we did last time when I read out those like 2 patents and how one of them was very clearly like a method and one of them was very clearly a like idea, right? One was gamification of health awareness based on character sleep patterns, and the other was non-transitory storage information processing method. And software patents are meant to patent a method, not a concept or an idea. And I wasn't like pulling from like, oh, they patented this way back in the day. Those are 2 patents that they got like awarded recently. Anyway, I throw all that out there because as we know, at least in the US, you can lose patents in the litigation process if you bring them up.
Really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You can walk into a court, sue someone on infringing one of your patents, and the court may find, at least in the U.S., that the patent should have never been granted to you in the first place because that patent was, too general. Or it was for a concept that should have been protected under copyright, not granted to you to exclude other people through the patent process. So
that's wild.
So yeah, it is theoretically possible, if the Japan legal system works similar, that Nintendo might walk out of there being the loser in a case against Palworld and having at least one patent invalidated. It's possible. We'll see.
Wow.
But what I want to talk about is not Nintendo v Palworld, but something that might be good news for gaming. As astute listeners of this show will know, Mr. Nice Guy, it is the position of Mac here at Two Nerds in a Pod, a video game podcast, that a video game you purchased should be playable, to the extent allowed by physics, of course, for basically as long as you want.
Sure.
And I think, is that fair to say that that's more or less your position as well?
Yeah, that's more or less my position, 100%.
Yeah. I will go further and say that no one should be required to keep a game operational for you, but you should have the ability to play what you want.
Sure, I'd agree.
Yeah, so it's not surprising that Stop Killing Games, as we know, is pushing in a very similar direction. And if any of our listeners happen to be in the EU, you should take a look at their Citizens Initiative and sign it if you feel the same. But back here, down to earth, in the United States, some people in California have kind of taken note. Let me tell you the story, Mr. Nice Guy. Back in early December of last year, Sony announced, as you may recall, that they were removing 1,300 movies and TV shows that people had bought, air quotes, on the PlayStation Store. Now, at the end of that same month of December, Sony managed to keep all of those titles on there, but it had already landed on the radar of Assembly member Jackie Irwin, who represents the 42nd District in California. And she started the ball rolling on a little thing called, and you won't just get this, it's got a great title, Assembly Bill AB 2426. And if that ain't a barn burner, I don't know what is. But in the process, they cited the shutdown of The Crew, the video game The Crew from Ubisoft, that was given international attention because of Ross Scott and Stop Killing Games. So now, I had kind of had this on low down the radar for reasons we'll talk about, but her work was finally signed into law a few hours before our last recording, so I wasn't really ready to chat about it yet. But what this does, and is designed to do, is to establish new requirements for the sale of digital goods in the state of California, and as a result, likely for the U.S. as a whole. And unlike a lot of technology laws, This is explicitly and expressly meant to apply to video games. And in the briefest of terms, I'll throw this out there because as we all know, you cut some briefness, you miss out on some of the nuance, but in the briefest of terms, if the publisher cannot revoke your access to a game after you bought it, nothing changes. You're exempt. Have a good day, ma'am. If you operate on a subscription fee from month to month, nothing changes. Have a lovely evening, sir. If you give your digital game away for free, thanks for coming out to the meeting. See you next Thursday. Nothing you need to see here. For those of you still in your seats, if you sell it for money, can revoke access to the gamer, and it's not expressly a subscription from the outset, we've got words for you. Quote, "It shall be unlawful for a seller of a digital good to advertise or offer for sale a digital good to a purchaser," that's you and me, Mr. Nice Guy, "with the terms buy, purchase, or any other term which a reasonable person would understand to confer an unrestricted ownership interest in the digital good, or alongside the option for a limited time rental, unless you spell out," and this is where I'm going to leave the quoting and just go for the paraphrasing, "you spell out in no uncertain terms that they lose access at any time, you don't own anything, and it can no longer be a provision buried in the terms of service." On page 573, they want a upfront, big, bold, hey, look, you understand, you're not buying anything. A lot of times, there are plenty of games where you can't see the terms and service until after you've already purchased the game.
Sure.
And you've installed the things and you're starting to boot it up the first time. It's just like, nope, this happens before the purchase happens. So an interesting tactic, I will say. Definitely a different approach. Is this good for gaming? What do you think?
Is this rhetorical or are you asking?
No, I'm asking. Do you think this is a step in the right direction?
If the upfront admittance of them not owning anything is a good step, I don't think it's a good step.
Okay.
Because I like the idea of the ownership, whether it is true ownership because I physically own the game, or whether it's implied because a transaction took place. I handed you money. You, quote unquote, handed me a game. I now own that game. So don't tell me that I do not own anything. That's not the case, and that's not the way that this works. Now, if I sign something and I accept an agreement that says that, and that's the only way I can access the game, fine, I have to accept that. Much like I used the example earlier in the show of I have the right to make an educated decision on purchasing a game where there's hackers, but I don't like that idea that could set a precedent that we're always going to have to admit we don't own anything. I don't like that at all.
And I would like to emphasize for any new listeners that Nice Guy and I do not coordinate these things in advance. We did not know how much these ideas would sort of wind up lining up and all headed in the same way. Nice Guy and I are just on the same wavelength.
That's right.
But I'm inclined to agree with you. I think that this is a meh move at best. I don't think the problem facing video games, facing that PlayStation store, was the notion that PlayStation did not put up front, that Ubisoft did not put up front, hey, you're going to buy this and you won't own it. I don't think that's the real issue. The real issue is them treating us like we don't own anything. And that's where it needs to be, where the battle needs to be fought. So if this is the type of thing that pushes somebody to say, hey, I don't like this, there should be some change, maybe it's a good. If this is where the push stops, then I say this is a bad thing. As is, maybe it's okay. I mean, what I hope is that Assemblymember Jackie Irwin keeps on pushing. See, I used to live in the 42nd District. And I'm a little bit proud to see somebody doing something. Even if it's not all the way, she's got the spirit. And I want to see this continue. And if this is the first step, then heck yeah. Let's get ready to storm the battlements. Because I'm in. That's all I'm saying. That's not the law. That's just legalese.
That's just some legalese. Well, thank you everybody for coming in and tuning in and hanging out with us here live and or after the fact to episode 320 of Tuners in a Pod. Before we go, we have one last segment called What We've Been Watching and What We've Been Playing. And if you're here live, you have a job to do. Let us know in the chat what you've been watching on your PlayStation, on your Xbox, your Nintendo, your phone even. Let us know what you've been watching across all platforms, streaming, physical media, or otherwise, because we're always looking for cool, nerdy stuff. Mac, what have you been watching and playing, sir?
Oh, man. I haven't had that much time with all these people around, but I've been playing a game that we'll talk about in the near future, a couple. I've also been playing an oldie but a goodie, Creeper World 4. It's a real-time kind of tower defense-y, but that doesn't really capture it. But it's a game series that I've been playing in the background for probably the better part of 15 years, maybe even 20.
Nice.
So it's been a long-lived series, and I enjoy it. But that's most of what I've been playing. Watching, though, I have been watching, again, not much, because it's been Dungeons and Dragons in my house, in-person games. I'm living the dream. How about you?
Mac, so I've been playing a newer game. It's in early access called Witchfire. And I really am enjoying it so far. It's like one part Skyrim, one part Destiny. Mm-hmm. It's a roguelite as well, though. So you're kind of in a dark magic type of area, type of theme, where you're going around first-person shooter style and shooting all these different monsters and things, collecting Witchfire, which is the currency, and then when you finish a run, either through extraction or through death, going back to the hub and upgrading your character, creating new things in the shop and getting things that you can use for future runs. I am really enjoying it on the Steam Deck. And Mac, I want to put this out there, peek behind the curtain for the people. One of the things that I do for the pod, we do it together, but I often find new games that we want to try, and it's rare that we ever get someone who says, no, we don't want to give you our game. In fact, it has never happened. We've gotten silence, but this week it happened. And the game that it happened, Mac didn't know, he hadn't seen the email, I guess. The game that it happened for was Witchfire. And I say this not to call out the dev, but when Mac and I won the podcast awards 2 weeks ago, one of the things that we said in our acceptance video is that you should support devs because that's the only way they can continue to make games. Part of the way we support devs on this podcast is by getting those games, reviewing them so that our viewership can listen. But this studio said no, and so I went out and I purchased the game because even though they said they had already given out so many keys and et cetera, I still wanted to support this game because I believe in it.
Yeah.
And I think that if it's your type of game, you should check it out. So, Witchfire is a game I'm really enjoying. And then my boys have turned me on to Brawl Stars, which is an interesting little game for mobile that is addicting. As far as watching, I really haven't had a ton of time to watch, mostly just some YouTube stuff. Mac, why don't you take us home, sir?
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. To anybody new who found us because of the Podcast Awards, thank you so much, and we hope we can count on your support next year. Each week, we try and get together at 7 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Central in order to record this show live on twitch.tv/2nerdsinapod. And these are our live viewers who we are interacting with and occasionally stump us in the trivia segments. Come be a part of that. But if you're listening after the fact, thank you. Be excellent to each other. We will see you next week, and keep it nerdy.
Deuces, video games are art. Love you.
Bye.